outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.
Hello everybody, welcome to Teachers Talk Radio. My name is Jamie Clark and this is my debut show. I'm streaming pretty much live on every platform imaginable right now. So welcome. I am today joined by a really special guest, Abdul Chohan, which we'll come on to in a few minutes. But first and foremost, I just want to tell you all about my show, which is pretty much going to be every Saturday or every alternate Saturday live on Teachers Talk Radio from 1 p.m. till 2 p.m. and that's UK time. I'm actually broadcasting live from Perth right now. So if I look tired, that's why, because it's 8 p.m. here and I'll be going to bed quite shortly after this. But yes, I just want to kick off today by talking about our sponsors for the show. Our sponsors today are the John Catt Educational. John Catt Educational are an outstanding publisher who develop professional development books for teachers. They are known around the world now, and you can level up your professional development today by visiting John Catt, the johncattbookshop.com, to explore all the titles, including my own. And you can also use the code JCTTR 2425 and you can get 20% off your order. So please check that out at johncattbookshop.com. We're also sponsored by Teaching How-Tos, which looks incredibly interesting. If you've not heard of it, imagine that you've got your own instructional coach available 24/7. It's a reality with Teaching How-Tos. It is a highly personalized social platform that empowers busy teachers like yourselves to learn and apply evidence-based teaching techniques, either independently, working collaboratively with others, or with their new AI assistant. So the platform features over 160 visual guides for teaching, which is really cool. And if you're interested, you can go to their website, which is teachinghowtos.com, and you can register for their next webinar. Okay, so today we are talking with the Abdul Chohan. Abdul Chohan is a friend of mine. I've known him for quite a while, on and off, and he is a very experienced school leader. He has been a head teacher, CEO. He's done the lot pretty much, and he is also now the VP of Shobi. Abdul is known pretty much everywhere for his work with technology in the classroom, which is why it interested me and why I wanted to get him on, because I do bits and pieces of that as well. And Abdul pretty much is into evidence-informed practice as well, which I'm sure he's going to tell you in a minute, but I just couldn't wait to tell you myself. So let's bring Abdul up and let's welcome him to the stage. Okay, Abdul.
Hey, Jamie. Hi.
How are you?
How you doing? Very
I'm
well.
great.
Very well.
Thank you. Yeah. So how have you been getting on recently? Have things been progressing smoothly for you?
Yeah, it's like super busy at the moment. I think in the month of June, I'm only home for about 4 days or so.
Wow.
But it's kind of pretty busy at the moment with schools here in the UK.
Yeah.
Some international stuff as well in India as well as the UAE. And so on, some online stuff with Saudi Arabia and so on as well. So there's a lot of movement happening with schools kind of wanting to know more about learning, evidence-informed practice, and so on. It's keeping me busy. Let's just say that.
I can tell you're a very busy man, Abdul, very busy. So just for our viewers who don't know much about you and your educational journey, if you like, do you want to give us an outline and tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So my background really is a high school chemistry teacher. I taught chemistry for many years in my hometown, in the northwest of England. I kind of like slowly progressed from there to like middle leadership. Did some pastoral, was a pastoral head for a short while as well, and then eventually became a senior leader. We did some work around teaching and learning, but actually like the deployment of technology as well, and how the two things kind of connected together. That was in 2008, before
Right.
tablets and things like that. Like we were kind of like really right at the beginning. We learned how not to do things, and we
Which is
kind
good
of grew
sometimes.
from there, which is sometimes a good thing. Yeah, and then for a short while I was principal as well, and then took on the role of the CEO of a multi-academy trust here at that time. So setting up a multi-academy trust, central services, adding additional schools and things like that. Then 2013, I also did a local project. We opened what we call a free school here. So that's a primary school. So I was one of the founding members of that, and I still sit on the trust board for that school as well. So yeah, lots and lots of kind of different experiences kind of growing up. And then 2014, I was kind of getting a lot of interest internationally, like people wanting to know about technology and learning and how does it make a difference and what can you do and what you shouldn't do and so on. And the thing is, Jamie, if you're from Bolton, which is kind of where I'm from, and you start getting emails from Mauritius and Maldives, usually the answer is yes, I'm coming over.
Yeah. Yeah, and you go to Dubai a lot as well, don't you? You kind of fly
Yeah,
around.
yeah, we do a
area.
lot of work with schools in Dubai. It's an interesting kind of area because there's a lot of like expats over there. There's a lot of synergies between the UK and their head teachers that used to teach here and now kind of teaching over there, and they kind of
Yeah.
wanting to build that evidence-informed practice and so on. So there's a lot of forwards and backwards with Dubai as well.
So when you say you've been working quite a long time now, you've had a lot of experience in schools. What have you noticed are the main, I guess, changes especially since like 2008? When you mentioned about introducing technology into schools and kind of that revolution that happened after that.
Yeah.
How have things changed? From then until now.
Kind of going. I think probably some of the biggest changes are the more simple changes. So. At that time, generally speaking, like the experience of using technology for educators was often a painful one, right? That was the era, and people sometimes, time moves fast, and sometimes we stop and reflect back. So 2008 was a really interesting year. That was the year when the App Store first came out, right?
Oh, yeah.
So it was the first time that you could actually a teacher could download a piece of software from the App Store to their computer without taking a CD to the IT department and say, hey, can you put this on all the computers for me, right? And those people that were teaching at that time, they'll remember that, like that whole experience, right?
Yeah.
The other thing that's changed significantly is that in those days, you switched on a computer, you had to wait for it to boot up, you might go and make a coffee, come back, put your password in, blah, 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 and so on. And now we have technology that's kind of like always on, and you press a button and it's always kind of ready to go. There isn't that logging in, wait for things to happen and so on. So that's changed significantly in terms of the simplicity and reliability of things. Obviously, internet has played a huge role. At that time, Wi-Fi internet was still pretty new. Not every school had access or reliable access. That's kind of pretty much a standard thing, although I do know of schools that still struggle. But actually, generally speaking, that element has kind of changed things. People expect that to be there in schools. So fundamentally, that's been a big shift. And also, there's been a shift now across the world, I would say, to a more one-to-one environment where organizations are considering, students have a device, teachers have a device. They don't want like lots of computer rooms and things like that. There's a bit of a shift that I'm kind of seeing around that as well.
Yeah, I mean, like I can tell that things have kind of grown up a lot recently in terms of the technology in the classroom, especially since this revolution in terms of evidence-informed practices and cognitive science, which I can tell you've started to talk more about now in your talks and presentations and work with schools, which is, I guess it's more commonplace now. Well, you mentioned to me before about seeing, one pages everywhere you go and teaching walkthroughs and various other kind of things that are pushing teaching and learning forward. But my mantra in schools is always, pedagogy first, technology second. which is
Absolutely.
kind of my message to teachers and to educators when they want to introduce tech into the classroom. So that's what kind of brought me to your story, really, is the idea of the DNA of learning, because what you're doing there, Abdul, or what I believe you're doing anyway, is putting pedagogy first and then seeing how you can, bring in tech to elevate it, to enhance it, or even to support it in other ways. So do you want to talk to us about the topic of this particular show, which is the DNA of learning? So I absolutely love the title that you came up with. Do you want to explain what it is? And
absolutely. So the thing is, since 2014, I've probably visited probably about 35, 36 different countries for a variety of some of them were just like technology projects with a specific school. Some were things to do with governments. Others were things like the African Development Bank wanting to kind of trial a few things out in certain countries and so on. And in some instances, it's just a specific school that says, look, we're interested in this, come and work with us and so on. So having done projects in so many different parts of the world, over the last 2 years, I started to really think about actually what is it that I'm seeing in any classroom that I go to, regardless of the context of that classroom, right? So some classrooms I went to were traditional kind of Western type setups, 25, 30 kids in a class, interactive whiteboard at the front, tables, chairs, the usual thing. Other classrooms were typically like, I went to a school in Kenya, in a place called Kakamega, and it was 65, 75 children, right? They were all sat in one classroom, right? No technology, and I was observing how lessons happened there and so on as well. I also went to a night school under a railway bridge in Mumbai, for street kids. There was an amazing teacher that turned up, no technology, nothing there. And, he came and he was, teaching the children and so on. And, at the other end of the spectrum, there's high fee paying independent schools, really great schools here in the UK as well. And other places that were doing fantastic things. So the question that I had in my mind was, what is it that I'm seeing that's a kind of like a consistent practice in all of those different kinds of what makes a teacher a teacher?
The things that thread it together. Is that right?
Absolutely. The thing, that glue, that it doesn't matter where you go, if you're seeing good teaching happening, you're seeing these practices, and that practitioner, that teacher is really good at making these happen. And the reality is that there's lots of things and lots of individual things that kind of came out, but I kind of saw 4 key things, and they were direct instruction. So I always saw really good direct instruction. So even that teacher that was under the railway bridge, I was kind of watching him thinking, how is he going to do the direct instruction? There's nowhere to write, there's no boards, nothing. And what was amazing, he pulled out a plastic apron and put it around him, and because it was plastic, he could write on himself. So he would do the thing, and then the children would come up and write on him, and he could get this amazing skill of writing upside down and so on. But anyway, so direct instruction, explicit instruction, like you could kind of see that. The other thing that I saw was that independent practice. Every teacher wanted to help, support, scaffold, break things down and so on, get the child to a point where they could kind of, show that they've understood something independently, they could solve a problem independently, and that independence element. Then there was always feedback, that question and answer and response and speaking, quite often verbal. In some, organizations, it's written and so on, but that feedback stuff always happened. And also the fourth common kind of pillar that I saw was that assessment piece. Everyone was doing assessment in one way or another. That assessment element would absolutely come up and people would see it. So, and there were other things as well. I'm not saying that it's just these 4 things. There are lots of other things as well. But these 4 things are kind of like, I don't think you can go to a school where somebody would say, hey, we don't do direct instruction here. We don't do feedback here. We don't do assessment here. It might look different. They might call it different. But essentially, you see that as an aspect. So then the thing was, okay, what do I call these 4 things? And then, I think the term DNA of learning kind of came to me, as in these are the key strands that kind of need to be part and parcel of that learning
Because
experience.
they're the fabric of teaching and learning, aren't they? They're the kind of inherent elements which
Yeah.
make up, and from your experience as well. Would you say that was a turning point in your career when you went on that journey and you saw those different scenarios, different kind of, you know, conditions that students were in, and that
Yeah.
made you realize, perhaps, was that a turning point in your career, would you say?
Absolutely. Because, you know, the thing is, technology is a wonderful thing to some people, and it's the scariest thing to other people. And, you know, it has an exponential development rate. And I know we'll probably talk about AI at some point, but AI is like that internet revolution that happened in 2008, 2009. You kind of see it
Yeah.
touching everything, right? Whether you like it, don't like it, it's happening, it's already there, and all that kind of stuff. But the thinking around the fact that we have evidence that tells us how humans learn best,
Yeah.
and the ability to apply technology to that specific thing, that's something that I feel quite often, even now, like school leaders that are kind of investing in technology and so on, it's not an explicit thing to say, right, this is what we're doing, you know, and this is why we're doing it.
Yeah.
And you're right, it was a turning point, because when I kind of came to that realization and reflection, I then actually set up podcasts with like eminent people in the field. So I spoke to Dylan William, I spoke to John Hattie in Melbourne.
Yeah.
I spoke to Michael Fullen as well,
Wow.
in terms of, you know, the humanistic versus the mechanical approach to technology and learning and so on. And that kind of then just consolidated the whole thing for me.
There will be a lot of educators listening and watching this who are very skeptical about technology in the classroom, because often in some contexts they don't have, you know, either the finance to back it, or perhaps the, you know, the idea of evidence-informed practice has not fully embraced technology in the classroom. What would you say to those people?
Look, essentially, so what I would say is 100%. By putting technology into a school environment doesn't suddenly mean that, hey, everyone's going to get better results and it's going to improve teaching and learning and so on. That is completely dependent on the quality of educator and the quality of practice and that evidence-informed practice. You could have the latest devices, but if you don't understand what good quality feedback is, then good quality feedback is not going to happen. So off the bat, we should just kind of put that out there. Technology is actually has, and this is a different piece of work that I did some time ago, but technology has the power to do three things in any organization. Okay. And whether that's educational or whether that's enterprise or business, essentially technology has, if you infuse technology or if you invest in technology, there's three things that it will kind of bring to the table. Okay. So the first one is that it can bring time savings, right? The speed at which you do something, actually, it takes a lot less time to make that happen. That's number one. The other one is that is overall, and this is really important to understand, not immediately, but over a period of time, there's cost savings involved as well, right? So you might invest something now, but over 2, 3, 4 years, because you have operational efficiencies, because you can do things that you don't need to do anymore, because you can save on printing, photocopying, all that kind of stuff, and so on. Over time, over a 3-year period, you see cost savings, and that's why big enterprise companies do the same thing as well. And then the third thing is the development of your workforce, the skill of your workforce, and that investment is something that you bring to the table. And for me, in education, it's developing that skill. Like if I've got 30 children in my class and I ask a question verbally, and you know, I want to see a response back from the children. Actually, we could do thumbs up, thumbs down. We could go red card, green card. But actually, if you are in an environment where actually the students have devices, their ability to respond, the ability to get real-time data, the ability to see which students have understood it, which ones haven't, the ability for students not to be embarrassed by putting thumbs up or thumbs down, who's watching me and so on, and get realistic kind of, and that happening in a split second so that it informs the teacher's next steps for learning. That's a really powerful environment to be in. Like to be able to do that without the tech, you can kind of do it, but it's not going to be as accurate as what you're getting back
Yeah.
from that perspective. So
Yes.
it's things like that we're kind of building in.
It's a really powerful message, is that I really like the idea of, you know, talking about the pedagogy and, you know, why you put that first, then you kind of build tech around it. So this is a question that's been put forward to us from Noel. Abdul, amazing to hear classes still exist without any tech in them. Especially like, well, in Australia, I know that our classrooms are definitely teched up, more so probably than the UK. But what's your thoughts on how far the other way we've gone now? So, for example, students having iPads and laptops with them non-stop. Do you think it's a detriment to their learning? Do you think it could have a negative impact in the long term, or should there be more of a balance?
Yeah.
I think what Bill's trying to say.
I think where I've talked about that workforce development, you know, when we invest with technology, the three areas: time savings, cost savings, and developing teachers. It's really important for our educators to know, in an environment where every student does have a device, it's really important for the educators to know when to use them and when not to use them. That's really quite key. Yeah. So, for example, you know, I was at an organization the other day. They have a number of different schools, and the conversation came up about handwriting and writing in books.
Yeah.
It's still an important skill set. It still needs to happen, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, are the children just going to be typing? Are they going to be writing, and so on? Actually, it's not necessarily the presence of technology that becomes an issue. It's understanding, how do I do instructional design in an environment like that, where actually the students need to write in their books and so on.
Yeah.
You know, and where does the technology play a role? So with one organization, the students still write in books. They will still paint art. They will still do things with their hands as though there's no technology present in the room. But when the teacher says, submit your work to me now, they will take a video, they will scan their work and so on.
Yeah.
And then the feedback element, that's the bit that kind of takes part on the device, because it just speeds things up for the teacher and so on, right? So it's really kind of that, ability to understand when to use it and when not to use it. And I think that's potentially a skill development area that often, you know, schools are kind of investing in trying to understand. But yeah, you also see that practice where, you know, I kind of call it a translational approach to technology. Give a device out to everyone, and then what happens is whatever worksheets and stuff they were doing on paper before, it's exactly the same thing on a screen. It's PowerPoints on a screen, and what they were writing pen to paper, they're just doing that on the screen. And that's it, you know. You kind of just see that as a repetition, and I don't think that's great practice. I don't think that improves pedagogy and so on. But one of the things I will say is that there is an opportunity now to kind of have this transformational use of technology. So if I'm going to give feedback on a handwritten piece of work, I can actually add voice to that. I can add a voice note to it, and I can speak to the student. And that intonation, that voice, that connection, that relationship, that element is still powerful. You might do it in the classroom and you don't need to use technology for that. That's good. That shouldn't stop. But where there is a need, for a specific student, then you want to be able to just give feedback in that way. Then technology allows for that transformational approach.
I think we're singing from the same hymn sheet, Abdul, because I say those kind of things as well to my teachers at my school. You know, we have to embed technology in a way that's not too intrusive, that it's not gimmicky, but it's meaningful and has an impact, and it's almost subtle in a way. You almost don't know it's there, but it can improve outcomes for students.
Absolutely.
So what I thought we'd do is just to talk through the 4 elements of the DNA of learning, because you mentioned obviously the first one was direct instruction. So do you want to talk us through what your thoughts are, what your kind of ideas are on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So look, direct instruction, it's you know, we kind of know about, you know, chunking information, explanation, breaking things down into smaller steps and so on. Typically speaking, and I'm kind of generalizing here, but you know, a teacher walk into the classroom, they'll explain a concept to students, right? And they'll try and simplify it. They'll draw, and usually in schools it'll be a whiteboard that they're drawing something on, or it's a PowerPoint slide that kind of pops up and so on. But the idea is that they're explaining a concept and an idea, and then the children or the students are kind of trying to understand that. And then the teachers checking, have they understood it correctly? Are there misconceptions and so on? So the thing about direct instruction, and I think where the possibilities with technology lie now, is that actually you now have devices where the teacher can, scribble on the screen and it wirelessly appears up on the screen that the students are looking at. Okay. But where the additional power of technology comes in is that now the teachers can use that infinite canvas to explain a concept and an idea, pinch and zoom and so on, but they can actually record that, right? So they're recording their voice and they're recording the scribing and the annotations that's happening at the same time. And then they can export that as a video. Now, there's a few things here. Firstly, the whole kind of research and concept of dual coding can be done in this way, right? So it's the explanation with describing, and the children can see it form in front of them. The other thing is that it's the teacher's relationship with the students, right? How I speak and my kind of language and so on. It's something that they're kind of familiar with. So that relationship element helps quite a lot. The other thing that I kind of find like quite fascinating in some ways, and I'll use this from a UK perspective, typically speaking, in a healthy school, 80% of a school's budget goes on teachers, right? In a state school, right? 80% of the school's budget, annual budget, goes on teachers, right? Salaries, blah, 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 and so on. It kind of makes me laugh sometimes, yeah? Yeah, it's fine, you're back on. Yeah, so what's kind of ironic sometimes is that we spend 80% of our budget on a process that research is telling us through the forgetting curve will be forgotten in 3 days.
Is that your end or
Can you
my
hear
end?
a beep? Yeah, it's my end. I think somebody's
It's a fire
gone
alarm
off somewhere. It has to happen, right? I mean, like if I was in a school and a fire alarm went off, fine enough. Oh, no, it looks like it's gone off. I don't know, it's somewhere else.
Well, I was doing a podcast the other day, and a helicopter was flying past the window. So I was like, I couldn't tell if it was my end or the other end, but apparently it was my end. So it happens to all of us, Abdul.
This is definitely a fire alarm. Anyway, it looks like it's gone off. It's the neighbours, I think.
If you see any, smell any smoke, get out. Right?
Can't see any smoke, so we're all good. We're all good. But yeah, so I mean, the point that I was trying to make is that we're spending 80% of our budget on a process that actually Ebbinghouse's work from back in the day tells us. I think most of that stuff is going to be forgotten, right? And I think the opportunity, there's an opportunity for us, right? Because look, as far as
I think we might have lost him
back on again. Yeah, because I mean, like it's kind of interesting, but I think historically, when it comes to technology, I think we've been really good at doing the wrong things really well.
Oh yeah, I agree. Lots of people do the wrong things without realizing. Yeah,
and the thing is, it's like and I kind of say this to think is that, but things like interactive whiteboards, right? Schools just went crazy buying them. It was just a done thing, right? Everybody went and they bought that. And I can see it in early years where children are actually going up and interacting and doing things, great. But generally speaking, like when I walk through schools and I kind of see it, most teachers are not using that interactiveness. But there's a serious amount of money and budget that's kind of spent on that. So I kind of call these things gym memberships, and I see a lot of these in schools. I look for these gym memberships, where you pay money but nobody uses it, kind of thing, right?
Absolutely.
So one of the conversations I've kind of been having with school leaders is that look, actually, there is a significant cost savings by empowering. I'm not saying that even if it's not a device for every student, but for the teacher to be able to do direct instruction. I know I'm speaking about the first point, the direct instruction element. The fact that the teacher can just capture their explanation and make that available to students so that they can watch, listen, stop, chunk it out.
Repeat it.
If you've got students, repeat it, do recall a few weeks later. Even parental engagement, where opportunities for parents to kind of, I know the Education Endowment Fund here has talked about parental engagement, and where they can see the modeling and explanation, and they're in a position to support the children, becomes pretty powerful. So I think there's a huge opportunity with that direct instruction piece and what can be done with that. That goes beyond that 60-minute lesson or that 5 minute of 10-minute of explanation that the teacher's given.
I know I've done that before, in terms of recording my explanation and annotating. Obviously, they could hear my explanation as well. It's super powerful when you can upload that and have it somewhere that they can access pretty much any time. Let's move on to the second point, which is independent practice. Do you want to talk about that, Abdul, in terms of how what you deliver on that and what your message is about it?
Yeah. So really, this is very much around that whole piece around, when you're able to provide scaffolding for students, when you're able to kind of provide that support, and typically that happens in classrooms, for a good learning experience all the time. But I think there's a layer that technology is providing where teachers have been trained and invested in terms of the type of activity that you're setting the students. And that's really quite key. If all the students are doing is making slides and sending them back to you, or just filling in worksheets and sending them back to you, then I don't think that that's a great use of technology or, changes pedagogy in any way. But just reverse the role of direct instruction. Now imagine the students have a device that they can scribe on and write on, and you've given them a problem to solve. But the activity that you've set is, I want you to explain your thinking, like talk to me, explain to me how you're doing it. That whole metacognition piece, what's going on, what are they thinking? Are they using the right language, the oracy, the confidence? Like every student can actually do that, and that content can now be sent back to the teachers. And again, it can be done in a very simple and reliable internet connection, all that kind of stuff. The tools are there to make that happen.
Yeah, I've done that before as well. Like, I've asked students to record their voice and explain something, because what I've found before is they often get a little bit too distracted with the bells and whistles of making or designing for example, a presentation and adding kind of the animations and whatnot. But if you ask them to explain and record their voice, then they've got no distraction as such, if you know what I mean. So they're focusing on what they're saying, and if they don't really have the editing features either, they have to do it off the cuff as well, so they can't keep redoing it. So basically they're they're off the top of the head explaining something, so you get to listen to their raw explanation, without any editing, without any bells and whistles of design of a slideshow.
That's right. And I think Jamie, like, unless you've been in that environment, a lot of teachers may not even know about this, but it's now possible to lock devices into a single application, right?
Yeah.
So the teacher can say, right, open this application and you can't go on to anything else. And on all 30 devices, that single application will open up and they can't go on to anything else. And then I think you mentioned something there that's quite powerful. Actually specifying that just on a blank screen, it's not a presentation, it's not anything else, just on a blank screen, I want you to scribble and explain your thinking. And when I did that podcast with John Hattie, he used the phrase the ability to hear the thinking. And I think that is something now that we can do with technology. I mean, let's be realistic. People are recording like voice messages all the time on their phones and devices and things like that, and so on.
Was he referring to technology, or was he actually referring to tech, or was he?
So we were actually talking about things like voice notes and things like that. Where children can speak and explain, and we were actually talking about voice notes at that time. But same concept in terms of being able to kind of hear that thinking, that metacognition, and the children are then using that dual coded approach to kind of share their thinking. And I think there's lots of areas that are kind of hit here in so many different ways. So special educational needs children that have additional needs and so on, and how they can speak and connect and so on. I think that there's elements of that. I think that there's that oracy development and language development and so on. And quite often, it may be that the school could have a policy that the teacher's not going to listen to every single one. Because we don't want to increase the workload, but the fact that the children are actually having a go at doing it, and that practice, and that kind of recall thing that's happening, when they're putting it all together, I think for me that's quite a powerful environment to be in.
I think professional learning ties into this really well. I'm just going to stop you for a second, Abdul, because I do want to mention our sponsors for today. Again, we've got two more, and those two sponsors are Easy for You. So Easy for You is where innovation meets accessibility. Their subscription-based offering not only equips schools with cutting-edge devices, but also revolutionizes the learning experience as well. So by eliminating financial barriers, streamlining support, and embracing technology, Easy for You isn't just about giving you the tools in the classroom, but they're shaping a future where every student can thrive unburdened by limitations. You can find out more about Easy for You at www.easyforyou.school. That's right, .school. And the other one is the Apps for Good. Apps for Good, it gives schools free introductory computing courses. The courses are for everyone, including those who aren't computing teachers, and they're fully equipped with resources as well, mapped to the UK computing curriculums. Students will develop essential and digital skills by working in teams to create a prototype app for good. So visit their website, which is www.appsforgood.org, to find out more. Let's bring Abdul back. Abdul, so we've talked about independent practice. We've talked about the concept of direct instruction. Let's move on to the third element of the DNA of learning. So we've actually worked on something in terms of feedback together before. So this is the one I was excited about. And we've discussed the work of Dylan William before, and how much of an impact Dylan's had on an education in terms of formative assessment and formative feedback. So do you want to just explain how feedback plays into the piece as well, and what your kind of perspective is?
Yeah, absolutely. So looking at the work, and I think shout out to you as well, Jamie, for your one pager on this, because I've been talking about the whole kind of feedback element to schools around this. But I think if we, as teachers, we kind of know good quality feedback is really important, and I think that just goes without saying, and it makes a difference. Getting teachers to kind of understand what is good quality feedback, what does that look like, right, is kind of professional development. It kind of needs to be revisited time and again, and so on. And historically, certainly in the UK, marking and feedback and taking books home, and then there's this whole purple pen, green pen, all this kind of stuff that was going on here as well.
Stamps.
Sticking
Remember
things in
the
books,
stamps?
feedback stamps as well. I've been to schools where I've seen teachers walking out at the end of the day like air hostesses, and like with those trolley bags full of books, kind of taking them away and all that kind of stuff, and so on.
That was me back in 2010. I've been teaching 15 years now.
It's a lot of work, man.
It haunts me.
I mean, and I remember as well back in the day with my old colleagues, when it came to marking, it was like there's a whole ceremony around it, and people had their own little ceremonies around marking books, right? They sit in the corner, I'll have a drink a little bit after I've done 30 books and do this, and I'm going to do it on that night, put something on TV. Like, everyone had their own, and I'm sure every teacher has got a story to tell about their ceremony of kind of marking books and so on. And certainly here in the UK, we then, as the research came out, there was kind of things that needed to happen, feed forward, and kind of closing the feedback loop and all this great stuff around the research. But what people are actually trying to do in a non-technology environment, apply that in an analog world individually for every child, for every book, and so on. And obviously that's going to generate a serious amount of work.
So how does technology help?
So now, more and more, a lot of applications, and some of my work that I've been kind of doing, my day job, has very much been about kind of developing the ability to give verbal feedback. And this is really important. You can do written feedback and annotations and so on, but based on the EEF's research, they've talked about verbal feedback accelerating learning. And don't quote me on this, but I think it was 7+ months, whereas written feedback, good quality written feedback, was like 5 months, right? But actually, my point is if we can give verbal feedback with technology to a student that is not with me, which is what technology is allowing us to do. Like, I can give verbal feedback to a student on a piece of work, and the student's not stood next to me.
Yeah.
And that means that begins to kind of change things, because the only other way I could have done verbal feedback before is if I was in the classroom and giving feedback to students. And I'm not saying that shouldn't happen. That should happen. That has its value. And a lot of schools are kind of doing that, in the moment marking and feedback. And that's great. But actually, technology with feedback, there's a number of different things. So I saw one thing that was really powerful, where a teacher went to a student, that student needs support. That student kind of needs to revisit that feedback. So whilst the teacher's speaking to the student, they just switched on the voice note recording feature and just had a conversation with the student, giving them feedback on that piece of work, and it was recorded. And that meant the student can go away, listen to that again, and has always got the teacher in the ear giving them that feedback, which was really kind of quite powerful. But I've also seen other policies where, the feedback element is actually, we're going to add voice notes to basically anything that you want. So even if it's handwritten work scanned in, I can just add a voice note, and actually that I can do that. And it doesn't then really matter whether, it was a science experiment and it's a video that I took, but I want to add a voice note and give feedback on that. I can now do that, and it's in the moment, something that's real. So the bit that I kind of want to highlight is the idea of equitable access, right? That students can now choose the tools that they want to use to share how they've learned something. And that could be a presentation, it could be a handwritten stuff, it could be a piece of art, it could be painting, it could be a video, it could be, analog or digital. But your process allows you to give verbal feedback. And without that technology environment, you're literally asking students just to be able to write something or create something, and then that verbal feedback, it's given in that moment, but it's never captured. The student can't revisit that verbal feedback, and so on. So I think that's a significant change in the way in which you can give effective feedback, still maintain that human element, because you're speaking to the students, and the students can return the feedback. They can now add voice notes and respond back to your feedback, close that feedback loop, and so on. And actually it takes a lot less time than having to, because 3 minutes or even 2 minutes of verbal feedback, even 1 minute of verbal feedback, it's like half a page of writing, right? And then you still don't get that. I did this in 2019 for the Chartered College. I published a paper on digitizing effective feedback, and one of the things that a teacher told me, it's not in that paper, but you can read about it because it is about digitizing effective feedback. But one thing that a teacher told me whilst that whole study thing was going on was that she had 3 children in her classes. They made the same mistake in the book. If she was kind of giving written feedback, she would have been in her ceremony mode of marking books and written exactly the same thing for all 3 kids, right? But because it was verbal feedback, like psychologically, although she's saying the same thing, how she's saying it to each one is different. The tone and language is different, and you just can't control it. It's impossible to say exactly the same thing in the same tone and everything, but you see student. So that personalization, that humanistic element, that was the bit that then became kind of quite powerful around this.
No, I love that idea of being personalized. It's tailored to that specific individual. It's not just a generic comment. Obviously, there's been a lot of talk about workload and giving whole class feedback to kind of minimize workload. But for those schools who have access to technology, that verbal voice notes can really make a big difference. If it's something they've been trained on, if there's something that they're familiar with. Is there a lighthouse school that you can give a shout out to who is doing this really well?
Oh, my God, I've visited quite a few schools that have been doing some amazing stuff around this. In Glasgow, there's Castle Milk High that's doing some phenomenal stuff. They've been doing some great stuff. There's a whole trust in the southwest of England, Truro and Penwith Academy Trust. They've been doing some fantastic work around this as well, as an organization. And there's some great work that's been kind of going on over there. I could probably go on with a list. There's an independent school that I visited not so long ago, Blue Coat School in Birmingham. They're doing some fantastic stuff. Beechwood Primary School's doing some fantastic stuff there in Crewe. Then Barlow's Primary School in Liverpool, not so far away, they've been doing some amazing stuff, you know. And Castle Mills, a secondary school, again, there's some fantastic work over there that's going on. I would kind of seeing more and more of this kind of happening, you know,
and
across
that's
the board, where people
improving.
are beginning to embed this.
That's improving student outcomes as well.
Student outcomes, workload, thing, right? You know, transparency around the quality of what's kind of going on. You know, that's been really kind of quite powerful around this as well. Using expertise, so that direct instruction recording bit. Sorry, going back to that first one again. If you've got like physics teachers, for example, are really hard to find, right? But you've got a physics teacher that can really kind of do that direct instruction, explain it, the ability to share that explanation with other teachers, and for other teachers to kind of understand how best to present it, is also kind of, you know, that powerful approach to sharing good practice.
I think like it'd be useful for those schools to model how to do this, the best practices, because sometimes I don't think schools who have embraced technology or who want to embrace technology know how to start. So I think those mini kind of snapshot examples are so powerful, which brings us on to our last point, which is the part 4, which is assessment. Do you want to speak to us about that, Abdul, and what you speak about?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, you know, Dylan Williams' work around assessment and formative assessment has been huge. You know, I often use, even on my slide deck, Jamie, I use your Dylan Williams and Siobhan O'Leary's kind of one pager in terms of what's possible around that and so on. Of course, you know, a lot of schools are doing this without technology, and that's great, absolutely possible, and so on. But the bit that I found really kind of interesting, and this was kind of a turning point for me in some ways. There's a lot of aspects to formative assessment and so on, but when I did the podcast with Dylan Williams, he talked about something called minute by minute assessment.
Right.
You know, and that really kind of caught my attention, right? Because that's something that I saw like a lot of good teachers doing. And the idea is basically that you're always asking questions and the students are responding, and you're trying to gauge whether, you know, is there misconception? Have they understood this stuff, and so on?
You're being responsive as well as a teacher.
Yeah, exactly, right? So this is where, you know, without the technology environment, again, it's thumbs up, thumbs down, or whiteboards going up and so on, and the teacher being able to scan the response and so on. But I think where this is kind of changing or being used effectively in a technology-rich environment is, of course, there's lots of quizzing tools that are out there, you know, the popular ones. I'm not going to name them, but hey, there's a lot of these tools that are out there. But the bit that's really interested me is when you're not creating a quiz and you're verbally asking the question, because that's what happens in the classroom. Right? As a teacher, you ask a question because you feel that's the question that I need to ask, true, false, you know, short answer, response, and so on. But the amazing thing about technology now is that you can actually ask the question verbally, but get a response digitally from the whole class. And you can see it up on the screen. So you can see all the responses. You can hide the names, but you can see the thinking that is going on in the class. You can see where there's misconceptions and so on. And it gives a great opportunity to discuss. So what I really love about this is that the moment a student submits an answer and they can see their answer on the screen and they can see everybody else's answer, immediately what they're thinking is my answer better than everybody else's? Or actually that answer's come up and that's better than mine because they put this thing in there. So you're immediately activating their peers as kind of as support for learning, as learning resources, right? And at the same time, you know, the same tool then takes it to another level where then the children can change their mind and then they can vote on the answer that they think is best, which might not be theirs, you know? So I think that kind of like, and the ability to do that like within seconds, that then allows a teacher to kind of think, actually, I can now move the learning on, or there is a misconception here. Most children are not really getting this, and to go back. I think that's kind of a bit of a game changer in terms of what's what. One other thing I'll just drop in here for you is that, just going back to feedback, there's quite an exciting thing that I'm working on at the moment, where obviously AI is kind of playing into everything, but we've been kind of looking at, Hattie's work, visible learning and all that kind of stuff. But what happens if we put that into an AI kind of environment, and when a teacher gives feedback, so the teacher still needs to give feedback, but say the teacher didn't give great feedback and just said, hey, well done, right? So the AI element will be able to read that and then suggest a feedback response that should be in line with what the research is saying.
Is that disempowering the teacher?
So what it doesn't do, what we've stopped it from doing, is actually writing out the feedback.
Okay.
But what it does do is it provides the framework with brackets, like you should put what's the even better if, or what they should be doing next, or what did they do well, and so on. So it'll do kind of write a framework, but it doesn't put in the actual bits that the teacher should be writing. So the teacher still has to write that. Right. So a bit like a feedback coach kind of thing for teachers, rather than just do it
Doing
for me and I just hit insert and it's done. Yeah, that's the bit we've stopped short of making that kind of happen. But anyway, kind of messing around with that at the moment, which is super interesting to kind of see. But
I think that's the point about AI, isn't it? That it's an assistant, and it shouldn't just take over and be the teacher, which is probably what people are scared of. But you're saying, that it can assist in terms of developing and targeting feedback specifically. Okay, thanks, Abdul. We're just going to
absolutely.
Thanks. We're just going to take a 2-minute break. This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Have you ever heard of teaching how-tos? Imagine having your own instructional coach available 24/7. Now it's a reality with the Teaching How-Tos platform. This highly personalised, socialised platform empowers busy teachers to learn and apply evidence-based teaching techniques, either independently, working collaboratively, or with their peers, or with their new AI assistant. The platform features over 160 visual guides to teaching techniques. Interested in finding out more? Visit teachinghowtos.com and register for their next webinar. Easy4U is where innovation meets accessibility. Their subscription-based offering not only equips schools with cutting-edge devices, but revolutionises the learning experience. By eliminating financial barriers, streamlining support, and embracing technology, Easy4U isn't just providing tools, they are shaping a future where every student can thrive, unburdened by limitations. Easy4U, transforming education, one device at a time. Find out more at www.easy4u.school. Apps for Good gives schools free introductory computing courses. The courses are for everyone, including those who aren't computing teachers, and they're fully equipped with resources mapped to the UK computing curriculums. Students will develop essential and digital skills by working in teams to create a prototype app for good. Visit www.appsforgood.org to find out more. Hello, we're back.
Hey, good to be back.
I just wanted to ask you before we finish, really, what would some, let's say, 3 takeaways be if you had to encourage teachers to embrace, using technology in the classroom, with research in mind? What would the takeaways be in terms of how they could start for someone who's new to this idea of embedding tech?
Absolutely. So I think the first thing that I would say is that ask yourself the question, which aspect of pedagogy that you kind of want to focus on, rather than what aspect of technology that you want to focus on. Because I could have shown you a whole bunch of amazing augmented reality applications. Hey, this looks really cool. That looks really cool, and all that kind of stuff, and so on. But actually, that's the wrong place to start. The place to start is what aspect of the pedagogy, or what aspect of pedagogy are you trying to improve? And of course, with a lot of the organizations that we're working with that are new to this, we're asking them to look at either direct instruction, independent practice, assessment, or feedback, right? And then we kind of then ask yourself the question, like, where are the operational efficiencies? How is this better than what I'm doing right now in terms of practice or saving time and so on? So that's the place. That's one thing that I would definitely say. The second point that I would make is look for opportunities or look for technologies that allow a humanistic connection rather than a mechanical connection. What do I mean by mechanical? Just getting things from A to B. But humanistic is that ability to use voice and video,
Yeah.
so that dual coded stuff, the fact that I can hear voice notes and so on. That human connection is still really important, so that's the second thing that I would say. And then I suppose the third thing that I would say is that technology doesn't automatically mean digital. Technology can be digilog, it could be analog and digital brought together, right? And actually, what you might where you see as an educator, you're seeing that you need to do this in an analog way that's really powerful, that needs to happen, then absolutely bring that, make that happen in that way. It doesn't have to be done with technology, but the ability to submit, give feedback, and so on, whatever that analog thing is, and to have that digilog approach with technology is something doable.
That's brilliant. Yeah, I love that kind of really small step approach, because I think a lot of people are threatened often when they think about using tech. 'Cause it's like it's too big a thing to learn in terms of the learning
Yeah.
curve. But you're saying start small, start with what you know in the classroom, and find ways for it to be built into direct instruction, to be built into independent practice, to enhance
Absolutely.
those feedback mechanisms, but also to get that quick formative feedback as well, which I really love. So last question, really quickly. What research have you been kind of involved with to develop this concept of the DNA of learning? What are the top three, I guess, if you had to pick them, that underpin these ideas?
Okay, that's kind of a really, really good question, because it's like a whole kind of plethora of different things that I've kind of been looking at in terms of research. Certainly, Dylan Williams' formative assessment and his work on what that minute by minute assessment looks like, and that response time to that, and how frequently you can make that happen, and the frequency of that happening, that has been fascinating for me. And in fact, I'm always looking at ways in which technologies can allow for that to happen in a more fluid way that is just super easy to do. So that's definitely one area. The other one was around dual coding, and that whole thing around the fact that we can now kind of get the annotation as well as the voice kind of in together. And the reason for that, in terms of when I talk about the dual coded approach, is it works both ways. It works for the teacher, that's really powerful from a teacher perspective, but actually asking the students to use the same approach to send something back to you, that in itself is super powerful as well. So that is another area that I think is huge. There are still lots and lots of schools. It's just like every lesson's death by PowerPoint and slide, and then the children walk away and they either just have the slide and it's just static. There's no explanation. There isn't the teacher thinking, the teacher talk. There's none of that. And I think like we live in a world where that is so easily done. Any teacher can be taught how to kind of turn that into a dual coded kind of approach. So that's the other thing. I suppose finally is the stuff on feedback. I really love the work that the EEF have been doing, and I know they've been taking on feedback and their publications on that's the Education Endowment Fund. I think that's been kind of really quite powerful in terms of how they present the data and the impact of that, and what does that mean in the classroom and so on, right down to kind of building policies with like dirt time or actual response
Yeah.
time included in the lesson.
Very practical.
because
Very practical.
really
yeah.
practical, really practical stuff that can be, brought into it. And then for me, it's just kind of looking at actually technology has a role to play here if it's used effectively and in the right way.
Thank you, Abdul. I just want to say a massive thank you to being on my first ever Teachers Talk Radio show. I hope people have found it useful. I've found it incredibly useful to talk through those 4 elements. I just want to remind our viewers, our listeners, that the Saturday show live with me is alternate Saturdays, so not next week, but the week after, from 1 till 2. I want to thank Abdul again for his outstanding, awesome insight into his expertise with technology in the classroom. So without further ado, I'll leave it there, and I hope you've enjoyed the show, and I'll see you next time.
Full of outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused